file.
Sure thing. How about we reverse that? Is there anybody that objects?
Okay, I don't hear anyone objecting. Great. So I'm sharing a link in the chat here that we can use, I think, to shareable link.
It seems to be protected.
I actually don't. I'm not logged into my personal account here, and the one my work one I can't open up to the world. Does anyone else have a Google account that they can create a anonymous shared document for note taking? All right, so does anyone have a Google document that they can share that we can use for taking notes?
I can take a look.
I was trying to share my one, but I can't open it up to outside of my company. Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, so I just posted one. It should work.
Cool, let me copy in here's the agenda. Cool. All right, so let's go over introduction of attendees. Just go down through the agenda. So start with Michael. Are you here?
Yeah, he said like he will be late.
And then there's his brother. So Benji.
Hey, sorry, I had to dash away from the keyboard for a moment. I just missed what we were discussing. Greet introductions, I guess.
Yeah, introductions. Yep.
Hey, I'm Benji. I work on the graphical stuff and the GraphQL projects.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm Jaden. I work on the GraphQL multi-part request spec and the GraphQL upload project.
Hi everyone, I'm Benedict. I work on Lighthouse, which is a server implementation for the Laravel framework. And I do a bit of stuff with GraphQL PHP as well.
My name is Sam Parsons. I'm at PayPal/Braintree, based in the States here.
Hi, my name is Ivan, and I wrote initial version of the spec, and I also work as contractor for GraphQL Foundation.
Hey, my name is Jesse, and I work at Apollo, work mainly on Apollo server, but have touched many Apollo things.
All right, we went through the whole list. I'm not on the list. I'm Gabriel McAdams. I work at PayPal.
Awesome. Cool. So who can, next step, who can volunteer to do some note taking? We have at least one volunteer.
Yeah, all right, I'll do notes.
Yeah, I can help out a little bit. There's no guarantee I can stay for this whole meeting, so I will definitely have it open and do my best to keep it up to date.
All right, cool. So next up, reviewing the agenda. Has everyone had a quick look at the agenda, see what's up here? First up is Ivan You able to give us a kind of update on moving this back to the GraphQL Foundation?
Yeah, I just noticed that I totally forgot to add something to the agenda. But if there's still time, I would like to talk about the test suite that we plan to implement. I don't know when we can do that, but what would be cool?
I was hoping we can do that under point 8, discussing kind of next steps. That's one of the things I thought we maybe can discuss a bit, but I think there should be space for that there.
Sure, cool.
So basically, news, there is no news. Current state, like I ping them and I'm still waiting for reply. Last thing I heard from them is that they need to change founding documents for GraphQL spec foundation to allow for additional specs. And they also asked me to provide a mission statement. And yeah, just remember about that. And I actually think like it would be great if you review it. I will post it in the chat. It's like one sentence. I actually said it should be one sentence. So yeah, probably I need to open an issue about that. I forget. But if you see something wrong with it right now, or I will open an issue to discuss it, I can send them updated version. So this is like last request from my part. I think like they like right now figuring out how to change documents because Linux Foundation joined with okay. Maybe, yeah, we definitely need to, we actually need to add mission statement into spec. I need to add it as PR and we can discuss it inside. It's action item for me. So Linux Foundation have GDK organization for like spec development, and they like need to ask them and figure out how to do it properly. So at the moment it's stuck. Another thing I wanted to discuss, I actually discussed it with Sam, because initially I actually wanted to create the spec under GraphQL organization, but at that time it was like under Facebook and not really, ownership question was not really transparent. So I created under Apis Guru. So Apis Guru is basically me and my friend. It's just a brand name. It's not a company, it's just a website. So a question here, as I see, will probably stuck with non-official repo for like next couple of months at least. Should we move it to like a new organization, something like GraphQL over HTTP, or everybody okay with it staying under Apis Guru until we can move it to GraphQL Foundation? Like, so question, do we need intermediate organization for this couple of months, or we can just wait for official adoption?
I'd actually like to push that on to the GraphQL working group itself, because the main reason to make this kind of decision is legal. And I think that they should make that decision.
I think it's also good for community reasons as well, to get involvement and stuff, and not to get a bunch of 404 links when, you know, this is being shared around and people are tracking progress.
So Jaden, you say like we should stay with Apis Guru, right? Not to move it.
I think it's definite that, you know, we intend to move it, but sooner is probably better. I don't know. Me and all my friends have followed the Node.js modules working group and shared a lot of links between ourselves. And I don't know if that had have moved around, I think a lot of people would have lost track.
So GitHub's pretty good at redirecting, and it will do that through multiple renames absolutely fine. So long as we actually transfer the repo rather than creating a new one, I don't think
Yep.
that'll be an issue.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so big question, is it worth additional confusion to create like new organization just for a couple of months, or like stay with Apis Guru? Because like GraphQL, like everybody agrees it goes into official GraphQL work. It's just a matter like of time. So for us to collaborate in this month, should we move or not? This is a question.
I can just move once and do it right at the time,
Okay.
whenever we can.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that
That's fine.
reflects my feeling right now as well. I think extra moves is more distracting.
Yeah, if like nobody have like any concern of contributing to Apis Guru repo. As I said, it's not a company. There is no legal status, just brand name. So, and I can put whatever like, and I think like we can put any license or code of conduct or anything that your company requires if you need something for contributing. Before we give it away to GraphQL Foundation, we can put like temporary documents. So if anybody have any concern, just open an issue.
Maybe an easy interim solution is just to add a little notice at the top of the README and just explain to people who are not privy what's going on. And that's that paragraph.
I'm satisfied with that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, good action item to explain like that we plan to move it. I think like there is some sentence above that, but it can be expanded and said with new details, said it's like adopted, but we're in the process of figuring out legal like stuff.
Yeah.
Any other questions or stuff that I can raise with Linux Foundation guys about this process? So, when I will get update from them, I will probably open an issue just to update like on the legal status, so everybody in sync and understand what's happening. But like maybe you want to like to raise some, when I will ping them yet another time, maybe I need to raise something else. Anybody have any suggestion?
I think it seems good.
So I think we can switch to the next topic.
Let's just capture that there was an action item there. Ivan, can you take that to add that paragraph? Kind of
Okay.
more sentence.
And also mission statement there is second item.
Yeah.
That action item is further up already.
And it's highlighted too. Cool. All right, anything else on that topic? All right, so the next one is I wanted to discuss a proposed roadmap, and what I'm going to do is maybe just share my screen. Might just be easier to look at that together. So 1 second. Can you see my screen? Is it the text of a acceptable size?
Perfect.
Cool. So I have the updated version of the roadmap. Nice README markdown preview over here. So what I did was in this PR, just kind of summarized the different things that we talked about and took an approach that's kind of a bit opinionated. I know we had different perspectives about whether version 1 should have, like, what arrives in version 1. So I kind of wanted to like state out clearly a possible set of things to include in version 1 and discuss on it. I think before we kind of dig into the details, I think it would be really important for us to have a shared understanding and a shared goal for what's in version 1 and how the different things that we're all interested fit into the roadmap long term so that we can feel like we have a shared understanding. So maybe we don't go with this. That's, you know, it's open as a PR. It's not merged into the repo yet, but we kind of open that up for conversation. So let me first just kind of walk through what I've included. So at first there's a vision statement, which I think is very close to what this mission statement. So we should probably just replace this section with the mission statement that Ivan, you come up with. I included some kind of guiding principles. So over in the GraphQL, the main GraphQL working group, there's a lot of emphasis on kind of building development of the spec based on use cases. And I think that's helpful for us to articulate changes and new things that we want to add, why we'd be adding, how they help different people who are using the spec. And also wanted to outline that if we want to make this really usable long term, we want to strive for backwards compatible progress if we can. I mean, in general, even like as much as possible, because I think otherwise you end up with fragmentation and there's some problems with that.
I do agree with that point. However, the language you are using here is a bit strong because you say will. I think you could replace that by should.
I actually meant to make it that strong. I don't want to kind of get off into the weeds. I mean, we can kind of go into depth on that, but the thinking was if someone was compliant with a later version, they should support early clients who were compliant with version 1 of the spec.
So like from previous experience with GraphQL spec, we sometimes actually do breaking changes, but we try to minimize it. So like there is de jure breaking changes and there is de facto breaking changes. So like, for example, we're discussing adding a new directive called describe by, which is breaking change because people can already have this directive. So in a sense, but probability that somebody have like described by directive. So I think like we should strive for backward compatibility, and like in practical sense, we should be backward compatible, but in a sense we can do like small breaking changes if we're sure that nobody like affected in major way. Because like, yeah, to be like 100% backward compatible, it's severely limited design space.
Yeah, I see that. So then I outlined a possible vision for what would be in version 1.0. And so in this proposal, 1.0 would be pretty much just these items here in this scope, which is very minimal. And the idea is to just lay in layout and in structure, lay the foundation for future development and standardization. So I think like trying to organize the spec in such a way that we can easily add in the new areas, but not actually striving to get all of those done immediately and push that off to let's kind of make the document cohesive, explain in good detail everything, and kind of get the administrative things out of the way so that we can progress towards some of the other things that a lot of people are interested in going forward. So this is basically just kind of the main parts of the document that are outlined. I just wanted to kind of show like, okay, this is the details that we would go into, these are mostly headings directly from the current version of the spec. And I think these are the things that we would be looking for to happen. And so there's some meat in here, some ideas and thoughts about how we might go about that. Maybe we'll just kind of gloss over that for the high level. And then so version 2 and beyond. And I just tried to capture the different things that we've discussed in the previous working group, at least kind of throw them out here. These will kind of look at how we manage these in the future in version 2 and beyond. And if we can do that in such a way that's backwards compatible, like for example, something like versioning, it seems to me like a really good idea for us to have that. But if we want to be able to have, let's say we come up with some mechanics for how servers must communicate their versioning, and I use that word must, important right there. If we say like they must communicate this way for versioning, then we still want to kind of grandfather in most of the popular GraphQL servers, as even if they're not yet doing that, that they at least are compliant with the initial version of the spec and can additionally start supporting these other features as they get standardized.
Do you think that it might benefit the public to flesh out that versioning bullet just a little bit more? Because they might, without the context that we have, it might just look like it just the semver of the spec itself or something.
Yeah, so versioning mechanism. What are you thinking? What sort of?
I guess for like servers and clients to declare their interoperability with particular spec versions.
Version handshaking.
Yeah.
And feature support.
Yes.
I think feature support is modularity is the second.
Oh yeah.
Item.
They're kind of tied together though, right? Because you've got
Huge.
different versions of the same modules, for example.
I think we'll probably want to think deeply about those two things and how they tie together. That's partly why I think that we should probably do that as version 2. Like we should absolutely be thinking we need to do that. But if we do it as a version 1 that allows us to get like the mechanic or the administrative things all out of the way and structure the repo so that we can then put a lot of focus and emphasis on delivering versioning and modularity in a way that really is a really good way. We've already started to deliver value from people who can see the spec. It's already published. They can see that we're proposing new additions to it. If you look here at some of the actions, like I think something that would be helpful is to have some test suite. We can already automate basic compliance with this spec, and then we could add in versioning. And I think that's going to take us some time to really get something that's solid. So that would be my thinking behind splitting that and pushing that across the line into a version 2. But
I would rename version 2 because it's not necessary version like 2.00. It can be 1.1. So maybe we just rename it future versions.
yeah, I'm cool with that.
Is there a test suite for the main spec?
No, but we're discussing it. So for main spec, we have a spec text and reference implementation. And we, Oleg Elenkas, the guy who wrote Sangria for years, he tried to create one, GraphQL cuts. But for main spec, it's very complicated because it depends on the resolvers and it's hard to test. So we have some plans to test like some parts of spec and make it bigger. So it's something that we want to do for main spec, and we discussed it like 5 times on working groups, but it's really hard to do. For this GraphQL over HTTP, it's like way simpler because it's like HTTP, you know what you're testing. You don't care about like resolvers and resolver logic and promises and like async stuff. So like it's way simpler to do for GraphQL over HTTP. And we kind of have already a reference implementation in form of Express GraphQL because all other servers initially started from Express GraphQL as a baseline, and they all support more or less feature set. So I think it's in line with the goals of main spec.
I wonder also if we need any actual GraphQL implementation in order to serve as our reference implementation, because this spec specifically is serving GraphQL, which we can just call it GraphQL, but it's really the black box that is GraphQL over HTTP. So this is everything outside of GraphQL. So we could just have something in there that says this starts GraphQL, and that's no longer our purview.
Are you arguing, Gabriel, for having another reference implementation?
No, I'm saying our reference implementation is has nothing to do with GraphQL at all, that we could just mark something in our reference implementation that is, this is where GraphQL starts, and they take over, and our spec has nothing to do with that.
I mean, what it seems to me is that like for example, like there's the Express GraphQL, which is it for what it is, it kind of is the reference implementation of GraphQL over HTTP. So
I think there would be a huge value to having like just a fake schema just to use to demonstrate different client tech. And like I'm thinking maybe this test suite could be that, because you know I've just used GraphQL Pokemon all the time, but you know that doesn't always suit all the use cases for demonstrating like mutations or something. And so like when I was writing my spec, I just made up fake sort of schema stuff that isn't even in a real schema. I just called it like single upload or multiple upload. But like if there was a functioning actual reference GraphQL schema, like that could be used consistently in all the code examples of the spec, there'd probably be value even just outside of our documentation purposes.
You're right, and I'm sorry I wasn't considering some of those things that are inside of the GraphQL spec that are still specific to this subspec.
I think, Jaden, too, maybe if we could capture that a little bit. So on this point, instead of running examples of, you know, throughout maybe 5 of the most popular server clients with a standard GraphQL schema, and I mean, make that vague enough, that could be hosted or defined somewhere else, or maybe we define it ourselves for the use in here.
Yeah.
But
I mean, people are using Star Wars and Pokemon and all this other stuff, but you know, maybe something that is very minimal that can demonstrate mutations and all the basic things that, you know, we might want to test or demonstrate.
yeah, I kind of think it could be helpful for it to be within our own domain of, you know, the test suites here, so that it has just what we need and nothing more, you know. And
yeah,
when we find we have to add something, then we, you know, you add a particular mutation to demonstrate that use case.
Even just having reliable uptime, like you know, I've tried to demo stuff and the Pokemon Now SH or something might not be working, or because like there's no guarantees to any of these demo APIs that are up.
I think like since Express GraphQL de facto implementation and it's under GraphQL Foundation, so we can, I think like GraphQL Foundation have Netlify account, which is like paid Netlify account, so it's not uptime is good. So we can make example for Express GraphQL like simpler than Swappy, because I know like Benji and graphical team, they host Swappy, but it's in their case it's mostly to test graphical and demonstrate feature of graphical. We can reuse the schema or make it simpler for Express GraphQL. But I think it should be in context of Express GraphQL project. It's like touching and it's related, and I see a lot of value. Another thing, if we create for test suite, we need some kind of schema to test some things like error propagation and some stuff. For most of the tests, you don't need a schema, but for some tests you need. But a problem with schema, if we use too much features, we exclude some of implementations. Like not every implementation even support SDL. Some of implementations are class-based. So until recently, I think like Python implementation was class-based instead of SDL-based. So I think like we need to keep it to the minimum, to allow like to create like example servers really fast and maintain them, and not depend too much on GraphQL library itself for this test. So I would say like for test suite, it should be very narrow and very specialized schema just for like
maybe a separate schema for each test. Have a separate endpoint or a separate schema that exactly only just has the mutation types or whatever it is that you're testing.
Yeah,
Now I think we're getting into details that can be decided later.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Given that we're kind of getting into details here, that kind of tells me that in general, folks here feel that this is a generally okay approach. I mean, how do you guys feel about that? I mean, high level, leaving some of these things to version 1.1 plus, whatever it is.
Is batching easy enough to get into one? Is the community pretty rallied around that, or is that complicated enough to push it forward? Or
in my opinion, there's almost 3 different versions of batching that's going on. They are very similar, but they are not the same. I think we should not put it into version 1 of the spec.
okay,
with that. So we should not do that.
It's an idea for future discussion. Maybe we can, since we have now a list of implementation, maybe we can have a, like for proposals or for alternative implementation, maybe we can have like feature matrix, and like it will have markings that with implementation support with batching and other batchings. So just for future reference. So like right now is the idea to include non-controversial stuff, so everybody is spec compliant. I like Benji, last time you called it retroactive spec or something similar, I forget. And I think it's like unofficial name of this version.
Benji, what's a good reading on the different variations of batching? I wasn't familiar that there were multiple.
So there's actually an issue in this repo that talks about them. They are very similar, but they work. They have different things like the ordering of mutations versus not, the ability to chain things like exporting variables from one and feeding them into the other versus not doing that, and a few other subtleties like that. But yes, there is an issue in this repo you can read through.
Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we in the .NET implementation, Hot Chocolate, we are implementing 2 of them. Like we have the export stuff. We are very similar in the way to Sangria, but like Apollo uses batching just to reduce requests, where we actually can chain operations and then export the results from one operation into the next as variables. So there are different variations that you can do there. And I think for a first version of the spec, we should keep it simple and just have the most basic use cases in there.
So what would be, I mean, kind of ideal in my mind is that once we kind of get to the point version 1 is released, we now have the stage on which we can really get into the meat of the conversation about any of these like different things that we've talked a lot about, and kind of see them through a proper RFC process. So like that would be kind of the outcome of getting to like version 1 is actually getting all of that, everything set up really well for discussing those things and still getting value out to a community who can see that spec and interact with it and determine their compliance. So I'm not hearing a lot of pushback on this. I'd be happy if you guys took a look at the PR that has this. I'll push the changes that we have here, and weigh in if you're in favor of it or if you have some changes. Please do so.
Yeah, let's agree that we will keep it open for like a couple of days if no one like have major objection. It's merged, and if somebody wants to change some details, it can be done in like separate PRs, because it's also not set in stone. It's just roadmap. It's not spec itself. So like if everybody agree on waiting like a couple of days, 2 days, and if like, so I think it's enough time. It's pretty small document.
I don't think
Can
we
you
need
post
to be.
can you post the link to that in the chat?
Yeah, 1 second, I'll get it.
I don't think we need to be so stringent on it being a couple of days before it's ratified.
Yeah, roadmaps tend to iterate over time and evolve.
Yeah, I would just be happy with a few more. I just put that link there in the chat. I'd be happy with just a few more approvals so that, I think just Benji and Ivan have approved it, but just generally like, yeah, okay, cool, that's good.
One of the bits of that discussion we were just having restated something that I think we talked about last meeting as well, which was the feature matrix. I think that would be, I'd like to see that, I think, as an action item that we kind of work together to figure out which implementations we want to assess and which features we want to look at. And if that feature matrix does have 3 columns for batching, that's fine. If we could figure out which implementations are using which of the 3 ones, that seems like a pretty great action item.
Yeah, I think expanding out like the list of implementations to include also the features in that matrix, that could be that's a great step in kind of that version 1, is understanding where those different implementations lie on a matrix of how far they are.
Yeah, it's a great way to figure out if a feature is a candidate for our first version that we come to.
Yeah. Does someone, so we have an action item. Someone want to take that?
I can certainly help fill in the details for all of the Apollo details on that feature matrix. I don't know if I am able to speak for every implementation. I think it'd be great if people who know like a particular implementation best kind of like help fill in the gaps there. If we just add a lot of extra columns in there, features that maybe are only unique to a particular implementation, that's fine. But maybe that's a better cooperative way of getting this matrix filled out.
Oh, one thing I was thinking that we could maybe do is, because what I worry about is maintaining this table. And I was wondering if we could automate this, the creation of the table. Like if it's like the basic things here, like so scrolling up, if we add like the features that we're looking at here, basic compliance with the spec, we could automate most of those things, most of compliance with that. And therefore you just run the test against the implementation, running the basic schema, and you're able to determine whether or not it has the feature. So then if someone was adding batching as a new feature, maybe they'd add new tests, but.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe the first thing should be the test schema and some tooling that goes around that.
Yeah.
So would there just be like a repo with a huge bunch of folders, and sort of everyone creates their little server implementation of all the different libraries, and how do you execute that in all the different languages if you were to update the matrix?
I guess we could use like Docker or something.
We could.
GitHub.
There's kind of like a lot of different options, but like it would be good if like when we get to that point, we have someone kind of just like propose some different options for how we could proceed. Maybe even a couple of people tag team on it. Because I can see like at least a couple of different ways that it could work, but I haven't thought deeply enough on it to feel like I have like that's a great way to do it.
It seems like most of what we would do is build the process for how it would work, and then maybe involve most of the people responsible for these libraries. That'd probably have a lot to do with this. Maybe put the burden onto most of them to help set it up.
Yeah, I think it's too much work for us to put all the tests in a centralized repository, or to run all the tests in a centralized repository. So what we could have is like very basic setup that makes it easy for the implementers to run the tests. So something that doesn't have any specific dependencies, but just does actual HTTP requests and does assertions on that.
Exactly, it could be as easy as like a Postman test suite. They just have a collection of requests and expected responses. Should be not too difficult.
Yeah, I think we should separate the examples of the different possible implementations from the test suite. So you could fire that test suite, you give it, here's the URL, and maybe in the future when we say, and also test these extensions, these separate things, and then it just runs to that URL and it does the test and gives us the results, rather than us having to like tie those two things together. So then you could just fire off at even a production URL that someone is running, where someone else can check out that test suite and run it against their own in progress implementation.
Yeah, we'll just have sorry.
But that's very easy to do with things like Postman. I mean, we don't have to use Postman, but there are other tools that are very simple to run.
Michael, you're breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm on a train, so just go.
I would suggest like very simple criteria. A person who volunteers to do this job choose like a first tech stack, and when we iterate based on that, because like I think like to bootstrap something, it's important to start something, and when we can figure out if it's working or not. So I think it would be responsibility of a person who volunteer to do that. He will choose tech stack and how it's done, and when we can iterate. So it's not fixed version. We didn't invest a lot of time. It's like person volunteering and creating proof of concept. Let's call it proof of concept.
So perhaps split the task into two components, like just the tech stack itself, and then maybe defer what the actual test schema would be and what features you could separate them at.
I would suggest, like, I posted very basic schema with one field. Suggest, like, if we create example servers, like a PO, Express GraphQL, PostgreSQL, like popular ones, like especially if after volunteers do. I can do one for Express GraphQL. I know how to write one, and we create like with super simple schema, and somebody created test suite against like with simple schema, and if he need any additional fields, when he will open like issue saying like for this test I need this additional field, and we will implement it in like. But initially I would keep like number of example servers pretty low, maybe like 3, 4, 5, not bigger than 5, so it's manageable and it's not blocking the person who write and test it.
Yeah, I would be willing to chime in on writing the test suite actually. My current idea for a good tech stack would be to package it up as a Docker container and make it available as a GitHub action.
Okay, yeah, like it's a proof of concept, so I would say like let's try to do it and discuss if it tech stack and stuff when we see how it's go.
I'm having a hard time imagining what would be embedded in a Postman test suite or a Docker container in terms of like technical implementation, since we haven't actually established what exactly the tests are that we would be running and the correct structure, and like if the batching, like if the actual query parameters would be this, like that seems like one of the things that the spec is meant to cover. And maybe we should start with an Excel spreadsheet in terms of just like what features we need, because like even to build this test suite, we need to list out all the features that need to be in the test suite, right?
Correct.
Well, I think we basically have to go with a general purpose programming language to do it, because they're not all of the tests I can think of right now can be implemented in terms of like a fixed set of values and responses. So there has to be some kind of way to handle variance.
Well, if we're testing,
I guess I just don't know if we actually need to sorry. Go ahead, Jade.
Are we? Is the intention to test clients and servers in both directions?
The intention is to test servers because yeah, like it's client server architecture. We don't discuss on subscription, which is entire its own like set of like discussions. So for queries and mutation, it's request reply. So it's like driven by client, and server just need to implement a spec. So
yeah, because I don't think that we would really need to write any code specifically about an implementation. I'd imagine that a lot of this task is about the DevOps of, we would define like an array of, all the URLs to the endpoints that we'll just hit our test request with. And, the DevOps around having a big list of all the URLs that, are served by all the different server implementations. And like, maybe we don't even need to get as far as having the first server that is being tested yet, but just the DevOps of like being able to automate that.
Yeah, so like to fully test the specifications, there is like things. For example, what if we have parsing error? So we need to test that we don't have data, we have errors. We cannot test exact snapshot because like different implementation return different parsing errors, but we need to test that it's there, and we need to test that status code is not 200. It's like I forget which one, but not 200. I think in spec it's say 400. So like we need to test such things. So we cannot do like snapshot based testing or just hitting URLs. If we really want, so like a goal of test suite, at least like when I suggested this idea, goal was to make sure that current spec test is compatible with all servers, and we cannot achieve it until we write a test suite that like send some stuff and check responses. So it's both ways. But as I understand the Jesse question is like we have two ways to writing a test suite. We can just like create proof of concept with like 3, 5, 10 basic tests and run it against 5 servers, or we can, as a first step, we can write test cases like in classic QA way. So to write what we want to test and what would be response and how to check it for entire spec, and then figure out how to code it. So is it right, Jesse? Was it your idea?
I think I just was, in order to get like the full spectrum of all the features that we want to propose for candidates to become a version of the specification, that it would make sense to just kind of make a matrix of all of the possibilities first, and then use that matrix as a baseline for building out various tests. I do think we should pick a framework. I do think that we should aim for automating this in terms of keeping it up to date. But for the first version of this, it seems like maybe automating it might be
I
better done
agree.
in a
Like,
spreadsheet.
I see them as both being critical components of this like overall action item, but I'm thinking maybe we could split off to different people, like the responsibilities for the different parts, because like I feel like you could probably set up the tech stack for running the test suite without knowing at all what that matrix is. Because I feel like I couldn't contribute a lot to the tech stack necessarily, but I could contribute to the matrix, and I'd rather like people not block each other. Like they could work in parallel.
Yeah, that sounds fair.
So like we can write separate document when we say like, for example, like first thing, server should support get, and like second subtest, it should support get with operation name, it should support like just sending query without operation name, this type of tests, right? We're discussing this one. So writing such document and another person just set up in a way how to start. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think it makes sense. Yeah, if somebody volunteers to actually write with like step by step, very detailed one, basically to turn spec text into test cases, yeah, would be great. Test case description.
A thought.
Us
like
back a
backend.
little bit to the agenda. We kind of veered off road a little bit. I think we're kind of discussing next steps, but I'd like us to kind of get a clear grasp, because like, yeah, like if we just kind of like finish up like the implementations, we can talk through the API, and then we can like get a clear document that has, here's the next steps we're going to do towards these actions in the next month. Can we kind of focus around that a little bit?
Yeah, can I make one comment about the test suite before we do move on, though?
Sure.
We spoke in a previous meeting about this, at least the first version, not being a restrictive spec, in that there are so many implementations, and right now we don't want to start right off the bat and say, this is what must be true. because there may be something out there that doesn't currently fit that, and we want that to be okay. We wanted this to be a suggestive spec, or a spec that shows what is allowed and not what must be. I don't think that's testable. We can't test that says you can do this, but you must is testable. So I don't think that a test suite is even something we should be looking at right now.
To address this, yeah,
Let's discuss that in the next steps then.
Oh, okay.
So I just wanted to share with you guys, in case you hadn't seen it, this was some of the work that we did to look over like the GraphQL over HTTP implementations. So this kind of begins, if we were to have some matrix that showed support, we could add it to this. But what I did was I just found all of the things that I could think of that were linked either from GraphQL's main page of code, because there's a page there as well, it's linked here, and just added in anything I could think of. And then I looked up all of the GitHub numbers, like how many stars they have, and ordered them in descending order, so we can see what's most popular. It's a rough measure, it's not perfect, but it allows us to say, okay, if we're going to spend time that takes someone 5 hours or 3 hours, are they going to work on this implementation and getting it instrumented and looking at it? I think if someone from that implementation was here on our call, great, volunteer their time. But if we're just trying to get a broad sweep of the community, I think we better focus on these ones near the top of the list and say, okay, let's make sure that we have basic support for these ones. So that's the main thing that I feel that I get from this, is I can see quickly which the popular ones are, and we can focus some of our time more towards those. I also did the same thing for clients as well. This is a bit of a gray area, because like some of these share similar code, some of them are not only over HTTP, they're also, they're doing WebSockets, they're doing other things that change the nature of them, but I included them as well. So I wanted to make sure I shared that. Do you guys have any questions on those implementations?
I'm assuming those servers are all serving over HTTP?
I believe they all serve at least over HTTP, although I believe some of them also additionally serve like over WebSockets.
Quick question, is like part of the goal of having these server and client implementation lists, like should we also have anything like any package or module that just touches on the HTTP layer? For example, like the GraphQL upload middleware. It's not a whole server, but it like does deal strictly with HTTP stuff. So it is an implementation.
Yeah.
So things like federation and stuff like that sit in the middle, gateways, that sort of thing.
Anything that touches the HTTP layer.
I think that's what introduces complexity, because like, let's say, for example, another PR that I opened was with the API, the list of like popular APIs, but it's really like, you can look at any of these servers, and the server on its own, without a schema, without like whatever, gateway that it's behind and all these other things, it's like, it actually could transform it completely. You take Express GraphQL plus your custom middleware plus your own schema that's doing random stuff. Like it's a different thing, right? It may or may not be compliant, even if we stated here that this server was compliant. I think that's a challenge that we're going to have. I don't know the best way to represent that, because it's not going to be a complete table that you can look at.
Yeah, I think like good rule of thumb is with something that this library implements. Is it like contradict specs? Is it like implement specs? Or is it like extend specs? So like, for example, federation, it doesn't add anything to HTTP layer or like modify it or extend it. It just add like a fields to GraphQL schema. So in this environment is benign. It's like doesn't change anything. With upload, you actually like using streams. If I remember correctly, you multi-part.
I think maybe an easy solution here is just to reword the two headings instead of saying popular servers and popular clients. Like maybe change it to popular server implementations, popular client implementations, and that's ambiguous that it's not just a whole server itself or a client itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think in that notion, then it would be fair to put, like you were saying, like there's like some middleware or something like that you mentioned.
And it jumps to mind the GraphQL upload middleware because it's used in a lot of the servers, and like that's where users will complain if we have a spec that diverges from that implementation because it directly relates to the structure of the post multi-part requests.
I would wonder, because if we put it in this list, it's going to get lost in the mix. Like I would guess that sometimes like the servers that may use that are more popular perhaps than that particular library. And so therefore it could get further down the list. So I wonder if it would make sense to have like a separate section of like popular, like supporting libraries that would
well,
have.
it's got over 800 stars, so it'd be about a third of the way up the list.
Right here.
But in essence, it's like you cannot use it like with GraphQL Ruby. So it's like addition. Basically, it's addition to Apollo server, or like I don't know if it's work with Express or just Apollo.
It works with any Node server. It works with all of them. I've used it with the Express and with Koa and with the Apollo stuff.
So like I think like we don't want to introduce new dimensions. So right now it's more or less like either language based or like at least like ecosystem based. So Apollo its own ecosystem in a sense. So I actually like agree if it will be like supporting libraries or like some additional category where it's like augmented. It's not implement GraphQL over HTTP, it's augmented it. So when we will write example servers, we cannot write example server for Apollo middleware. We can write like Apollo server plus Apollo middleware or without Apollo middleware, but we can.
It depends on what the intention of the utility of this list is, because in my view, it's just a good place to gather together common patterns in the industry and make sure that we cater to what people are doing. You know, I don't know if we intend to necessarily convert this exact list over to the matrix that we apply the test suite to. I don't know. Maybe I misinterpreted the purpose of this list.
I don't think that our job is necessarily to very finely and very concretely test all the implementations and every combination of them, but rather to get a general sense of how popular they actually are and how popular the different tech stacks are in relation to each other. So because the first version of the specification is going to be a compromise between something that's at least minimally useful, because if we don't specify anything, of course, we are compatible to everything, but it doesn't benefit anyone. And I think there has to be some breakage at some point, like breakage in the way that we specify something that is not implemented absolutely 100% by each and every implementation. So
I disagree with that. I think that we discussed previously that our first version of the spec should be written such that everybody currently is already spec compliant, and start specifying those things that are okay but not required.
I think
I mean, I think
there's
that's
definitely
true
a
within
cutoff
reason,
point.
but I don't know that we're going to be able to actually satisfy. I mean, I look at a list this long. I'm not convinced 100% that we're going to be able to make sure all of these servers are actually compliant. I don't know. They
Well,
actually may have
I
conflicting-
think it's about the direction in which you guys are thinking of this. If you're thinking of this as a restrictive spec, then there's no way we can possibly write one that makes it so that everybody is compliant. But if the spec is written such that this is not what we expect, but this is what is allowed, that says nothing about what is not allowed, only what is allowed. That's the first version of the spec as we decided in a previous meeting. And if we think about it in those terms, everybody would be spec compliant because we don't say anything about what must be done.
So I can speak a little bit and I try to be very short. So like initial motivation for, I don't know like common motivation for this group, but my initial motivation when I wrote it was that it was another company in our co-working. I go to them and help them with GraphQL, but they used Postman for sending queries. I said, why are you using Postman? And they didn't knew about GraphQL, and I tried to use Playground, and it wasn't working. And I spent like half an hour debugging it, just to find out that they capitalized property argument names. So they have operation name from capital letter and variables from capital letter. So in a sense, idea, like my idea when I wrote it, initial one, and it can deviate, but idea initial was to specify restrictively common set of popular servers. So like what general community agrees. So in a sense, if we discuss with use case, we breaking server that these guys in my co-working wrote because it's non-standard. They use non-standard argument names. Without it, we can write anything. Like we need to break some like weird servers. And actually, it's a good thing because like another thing, like Playground depend on some behavior and GraphQL depend on some behavior and other clients depend on some behavior. So like ecosystem more or less like 97% agreed on the stuff. We just need to capture with 97%. So
yeah, it's not like we are actually breaking them in a way because their stuff is already incompatible.
Yeah.
We're not forcing them to adopt the spec either.
But Ivan, what you said is actually a good thing because the minimal spec for me would basically to fulfill what GraphQL needs. GraphQL should be usable with any server. That's, I think, the minimal viable spec that we should approach for.
I'm just to butt in here representing GraphQL. GraphQL doesn't care about HTTP currently. It will in future, but at the moment, it's all done with a fetcher function, which could read from the file system or send things over network sockets in other protocols. It doesn't care about HTTP at all.
I know. But what I mean is basically if you use the Playground with the fetcher function that is actually used by most of the servers as well.
Sure, the example one, yeah.
That should be what we should aim for as a minimal specification.
To not forget like action item about upload middleware. I would match this list. Let's just add upload middleware in this list and rename a section from popular servers to popular server side something.
Libraries.
Yeah, like just not forget issue with because our conversations deviate.
Yeah, it does.
I know that, but if you look at the popular server like Apollo, which is the top of the list, they are supported with that approach, and I would guess that basically 98% of the servers would support that.
Support what, sorry?
Basically the default fetcher function that we have with Playground or with GraphQL, basically just specifying a simple JSON request with a query inside of it and a variables field.
Sorry, Mikhail, I confused you because like before that we discussed upload middlewares, and I wanted just to like have some something concrete resolution of that. So like because I think we all agreed on like supporting like graphical.
I'll do a PR to, I've got a couple of other implementations that are not on this list as well. And I can add some middleware and I'll rename the headings in a PR.
Yep, that sounds
Can we
good.
pause for a second? It looks like in the notes, there's a big word help written. And I think if we had more people writing notes, it would be easier to make sure our notes are there.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm struggling to keep up a little.
Doing a champion job, by the way. There's a lot of notes here. We've talked about a lot. We're up to
And
page
this
6.
is a side comment on notes. In the TC39 meetings, we have 3 note takers just to make sure that there's nothing missed. And I think maybe we should do something similar, at least 2.
Yeah, I'm struggling to multitask all these different things. I'm not even writing.
I think like we're recording, so we can, if somebody volunteers, and it's really cool to have written notes, but since we have recordings, maybe it can be done like offline if somebody volunteers, and I think it's quality of notes will be better that way. Like,
that's a good point.
Yeah.
So the next thing on the agenda is there's a PR open for GraphQL APIs. I'm wondering about skipping that and just kind of focusing the rest of our conversation on kind of what the action points should be. Does that sound fairly reasonable? Like, what if I would take?
Sorry, I didn't add this to the agenda earlier, but for anyone who was reviewing the pull request that I raised earlier, sorry, what was it? Yes, so I raised a pull request regarding making it clearer about encoding the URLs. And I wanted to know what our stance should be on putting code examples into the spec. I don't mind if we punt that to somewhere else in this. I just wanted to raise it because I didn't earlier, sorry.
Can you be specific? What is your question?
Yeah, bear with me a second. I'm just going to find the
I found your PR. Hang on. That's the PR?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so basically the README as it stands doesn't talk about actually encoding the query string. So it's not really technically valid. So I've added the spec text to explain that we need to do that. And as part of that, I put a sample implementation in JavaScript to show what doing this would look like in JavaScript, just to make it more clear. But there is debate over whether or not we should actually include something like sample implementations like this in the spec, or where those things should go. I'm personally happy either way. I don't mind whether it's in there or not. I just think that it's maybe something we should discuss because having code samples is often a lot clearer than actual spec text, particularly for people who don't speak English as their primary language.
Absolutely.
Or spec text as their primary language.
I think that was back to the earlier talking point about having sort of a test or reference schema like that our test suite and the code examples and documentation aligns to.
Another note here is, and again, this is a reference to TC39 plenary meetings. We had discussed something similar to this in our last meeting where a concern was raised that by putting quote official code might restrict what the larger community puts forth, and we should leave code up to the community and not up to the spec maintainers. That said, of course, the JavaScript spec is separate from the proposals, in which is where this code resides. So their situation is slightly different than ours, but I still stand with, we should do whatever we can to not put our stamp of approval on any given code.
I feel like I need to present opposite side, because it's actually objected code sample in this PR, and in a sense it's like example, so it's not prescribing you to use like this particular code sample. It's just example how client can implement creating URL encoding of parameters. But my concern here is like, first after that we have like example request, and like I feel it sufficiently illustrates. So it's have like URL encoded, unencoded and encoded parts, so you can see how it's encoded. And
I'm fine with that as long as we explicitly state that this is an example and this is not code that we are recommending.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like why opposed including this example code? Because I think like first it's like give impressions that GraphQL or HTTP is like designed for browsers, and it's not. It's like for any kind of clients. And second thing, it's like required you some knowledge of browser API to read it. So I'm not a native English speaker, and I'm not a native DOM API speaker or browser API speaker, because I like most of my career I work as embedded engineer. So for me, like I can recognize this function, but it's not something that I use daily. So I think like in a sense, I'm okay with saying in an example, having a sentence saying like in JavaScript you can use this function, for example. You can use functions from standard libraries for URL encoding, and in JavaScript is this function. But I'm against including like entire code sample, because it's like code in spec, and second thing, it's like it's big, and third, it's like in JavaScript, and I think we should not give this, like we already have a problem that people say GraphQL GraphQL proxies should be implemented in JavaScript, or GraphQL at all should be implemented in JavaScript. And I don't want it to be like emphasized in GraphQL or HTTP spec. But if I totally agree, if we don't find any other way to be clear about spec text, I'm okay with including code. In this particular case, I think like below example of actual request is sufficient enough.
And there's nothing wrong with using pseudocode in the examples as well.
Yeah. We use in GraphQL, main GraphQL spec, we use pseudocode. So yeah, I'm totally okay with pseudocode.
One thing I would
sorry.
You go ahead, Jane. I'll take.
Oh, I was just going to say that I agree with what you said, Ivan. I'd originally misinterpreted the dilemma about being what the fictional queries are in the code examples. But yeah, I agree to your point of not using specific language code. Sorry, Sam.
Yeah, no, I agree with that in general too. I think that the examples I want to see are, can I see what the HTTP request was and what the HTTP response should be? Like that's what I would like to see examples more around than the, I know it's going to be probably obtuse in some ways when it has to be URL encoded according to RFC 3986, but that would, I think, be more informative for a future person implementing this spec to see like, what is the request? What should the response be?
JSON doesn't count, I take it. Like when we're saying what shape certain things should be, like we could just use JSON.
In this case, like responses not really important to illustrate point of URL encoding, but what I think is important is what you try to send semantically and how it look like over the wire. So I think like Benji, you did a like great job of writing how it look over the wire, so it's sufficient enough.
Great, thank you. One final question is, does anyone know if I've actually pointed to the right RFC for that? Just want to check because I'm not really big on RFCs. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Common issue.
Sorry, I'm not following RFC. Where is?
Because there's like a new and old, and some RFCs are deprecated, so it's entire can of worms. Yeah, but I think it's like illustrative enough, and we can do like final review before making the release. So like until now, like nobody objects. It's illustrative.
Yeah, you're talking about the PR contents.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's referent RFC, so it's question if it's like final RFC or is it like there is like newer RFCs that update with RFC. No, always RFC bullshit.
All right. Shall we just make a note to comment that on the PR, Benji, about kind of looking into the RFC question?
I think we'll just merge it as is and someone can correct it later.
I think we can open an issue, just not to forget verify URLs, just open an issue that before public release we need to verify all URLs and all reference to other specs that were referenced latest version. I don't think like at this moment it's like really critical, but we need to not forget it before public release, so we can just open an issue.
Yeah, one thing that I'm concerned about with this particular RFC and what I've written in the text there is that it basically says we have to escape everything that is a reserved character. And technically that's not really required. So I think it's just going to be like a should escape. In many cases, like the code that you'd already written, Ivan, in the README would probably have worked in most like web browsers, for example, but may not have worked in other libraries, I guess. I'm not sure. And also wouldn't have worked if we'd had an equals sign, for example, in the text. So, yeah.
If there's these edge cases, that's just the sort of thing a strong spec should help with and clear up. I mean, I, as an implementer, I'd prefer to like just do things very strictly and know it works everywhere.
Yeah.
I think it's a brilliant question of why it's so important to have test case, because if we had the test case, we can actually test it against at least like a couple example servers. and this bring, like Sam, you wanted to raise a question about next steps, and I think it's important because we like hour and a half in, and we need to like finish, and before that to discuss what we need to do next month.
Yep. What I was going to do is, let me share my screen, but I'm just going to share the document that anyone can edit. So you should all just see the same document. And I pasted in here, these are the actions that we had from, just for context, not necessarily what we're going to do in the next month towards our next meeting. And I know people are going to have holidays in the next month, but if we were to kind of peel off a couple of, one item off of this list or some part of the things that we would need to do towards a version 1, what do people think that we should do? Could start work on the test suites. We could do some work as far as like looking into what the popular libraries like to support, maybe not in an automated way, but just kind of spelunking around the popular libraries. People feel like they would be willing to contribute any of those things?
I think example servers is low-hanging fruit, and we need it for anything test suite related. So like I send it to, like sample schema with one field, so we can implement it. I can create one for Express GraphQL. It will take me like less than an hour, definitely. So, and please don't, like for this first version, it's not important to create a Docker file or anything, just create a folder that if you have everything necessary installed on your system, you can run a server. If it's GraphQL Java, it's like you need to install like JDK and other stuff, but like the entire code of a library of example is in this folder. And I don't think we need a separate repo for that. We can do it in the same repo. And I think like everyone can do it for the language of their choice. Like for example, for Jesse, probably just for you, it would be super simple to run Apollo server with like single resolver and pretty simple schema. So we all can create like with servers.
Simple.
And I think it's separate. It can be like its own item that don't need anything else. And when we can figure out how to build Docker images or something else for these examples.
Maybe once we've got maybe a reference example for a popular server and we're satisfied with this setup in the matrix, after our next meeting, we can put a call out to the community to help implement all the different ones to test.
I think like until like we don't want to support all server implementation because even updating dependency will take effort. I think like it's normal that some for some servers it's the responsibility of the rafters to test it using our test suite. We should publish it like in some shape. But yeah, but for testing,
run it locally and then
like same. I think like JavaScript have like test suite, and like JSON schema have a test suite, and they just publish it. But to write with test suite, you need to couple implementation to run it against, and like I think we need some. So like it's obvious to choose like popular one or implementations that we have a volunteer to maintain. So I'm totally okay with maintaining Express GraphQL, and think like other people can help me in that, because JavaScript is popular and Express GraphQL is pretty simple and stable library. Same stuff about
I'm happy to try set up the test against my own Koa GraphQL server that I maintain.
Yeah. If you're willing to update like dependency, if you release a new version and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, even if it's just in a repo myself, just so that I can run the test suites and, you know, just.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what threw me off a little bit is our earlier idea that we could automate filling out the big matrix of what popular things do what features. And so I was sort of thinking along the lines of, oh, we'll then have to facilitate running the test against all the popular ones. But
yeah, like if we publish test suits, so like for JSON schema there is optional items, so we can have like optional RFCs. So if we codify like batching and we send array and server respond correctly, so it means support batching. So we can have optional tests for like RFCs or experimental folder in future. Like definitely not for first release, but for future we can use it. Or for example, if you have a spec, you can, maybe we can figure out how you can write wrap test or create like a plugin for test suite to test multi-part upload spec.
So I've not seen like particular, like maybe these are not specific enough for an action point that someone can own. I mean, maybe like something like, quote, the feature matrix is like, yeah, I can't do that. But I would really like us, I think we kind of talked about, a couple of people have said I could do something or I could do this, but I'd like us to capture that in some way so that we kind of can know like, oh, okay, someone is going to do that and this is who would do that.
Yeah, for some
So I think this has worked pretty well with the input union spec on the GraphQL spec working group at the moment. So someone started with just a basic document with a few examples, and then others started contributing more. I think that should work quite well rather than taking it out of GitHub. I think we all typically follow GitHub for this spec anyway. That's where we're centered on. So doing it on a central document, I think, makes sense.
But at the same time,
the feature matrix, Benji, particularly.
Sorry, say again.
You were talking about the feature matrix. We should keep that on GitHub and just kind of keep expanding and adding to what we already have.
Yeah, I think so, depending on what it ends up being.
Yeah.
So to clarify, like after Jesse's suggestion, I think like I agree. We can start with document with test cases actually. So feature matrix, does it mean like test cases, or does it mean like big features like
persistent queries?
Yeah, or automatic persistent queries, or like persistent queries.
2 columns.
Yeah, I think like
yeah, because they interrelate to each other as well.
Yeah, I think like it's like 2 separate documents. One document is to write test cases, and another one is to just capture what every implementation supports. In case of Apollo, it's great because you have documentation, so we can reference, like if you have automatic persistent queries, you have a documentation page about automatic persistent queries. So I think it's two documents, and we can work on both.
Can we
But
potentially solve this in a file system way, like effectively having a folder per feature with a document in it about it, and also test cases, test files also in that same folder? So it's effectively all groups.
yeah, so I think like for the first version, until next month, we need to focus on the stuff that's written inside spec text. So like for feature matrix, we can add like all the stuff we know, but for writing particular tests, I think we need to scope ourselves to what currently written in spec text. So for example, we match like URL encoding, and we need to add like URL encoding description for URL encoding test cases. If we
Sure.
start,
So that would be in the HTTP GET module effectively, which servers that don't implement GET don't need to test against, right? Because they only do POST, for example.
okay. I was thinking like I expect number of tests would be like 100, less than 100 or 100. So I think we can for time being have one document, and if it's become too big, we can split it. But one thing I like from input union process on main GraphQL spec is that we have champion. Yeah, we collaborate, but there is somebody is making decision instead of we discussing everything. And so I feel like if somebody wants to volunteer to be champion for like every point, and we can just collaborate on that, but somebody like reviewing stuff and like answering questions and making like non-critical decisions that the latter can change. So somebody is driving force for every, because if it's not personal, I don't think we will have any progress.
Yep. Is it like if we went down the list here and asked if everyone was willing to at least be a champion of it for the next, till our next meeting, and report back progress?
So are we going to limit ourselves then to the scope of our version 1 of the spec? So we won't bother putting in anything to do with, in our matrix, we won't bother putting in all the batching. We'll just...
For metrics, I think like it's fine to put everything you know, because it's like matter of just putting a link. But for writing actual test cases, I don't think it's worth to write test case description for like persistent queries. It's not even on the table like at the moment.
I think that would be part of that RFC. Let's say for persistent queries, that it would include its own like test cases at that point.
Actually, yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, if somebody willing to write them, and like, yeah, definitely. Actually, we have RFC folder. I think Benedict create one for batching, one document for batching. So yeah, great suggestion. I actually agree with that. So it's not a main focus. It's not like something we should deliver until next meeting, test cases for like RFCs. But if somebody wants to do that, yeah.
So does anyone have any, would like to be involved in progressing feature matrix before the next meeting?
I think, Jesse, you said you're okay with putting everything about Apollo, so it can be like a good start.
Yeah.
I'm
happy to put that down.
Yeah, so like at least it will have one row, very long one. Yeah.
What are the limits of GitHub Markdown?
Test cases. Does anyone have any interest in progressing that work?
I think, Jaden, you said you're interested in helping to write not tech stack, but like what should what should be.
Or maybe more under the point of the standard sample schema.
Yes, but the standard sample schema should be driven by test cases. So we shouldn't include anything into standard schema if we don't have test cases.
We might not need a standard. Yeah, okay.
So if we want to test, like, for example, null propagation, how error is propagated, we need to put non-nullable field. But if we don't test on that, we don't need to put that field.
And I just want to throw this out there. I don't think that anybody is here asking for a commitment for delivery. Yeah. And it is just a commitment to pay attention or work on this. As far as test cases, I don't even think we need any actual test cases, maybe just a list of tests that we feel are appropriate, and we can iterate on that itself before even writing any tests.
Yeah, I think that'd be a list of tests that we should implement. Like if we had someone work on building a technical framework, which I'm kind of interested in this one, next meeting we might say, okay, well, let's take a list of the test cases. Someone's been doing some thinking about what we should be testing. We could actually implement those tests, you know, and there could be those little streams could segue.
So regarding the sample schema, so there's two different flavors, paths we could go down. We could either have it totally abstract from any sort of realistic, you know, thing, like comparing Star Wars or Pokemon, how they're sort of a fictional use case, versus a totally abstract, like call a mutation, you know, create thing, or like, you know, upload one file, or instead of like add avatar to Star Wars user, or you know what I mean? Like, do we want a fictional example, like a to-do list or something like that, to serve the purposes for all of the documentation and testing, or something totally abstract?
I think like we need to distinguish between example schema and test schema. So example schema should be, as you said, it should be something like, you know, for example, examples in the spec. It would be great if you can actually run them against some example servers. But for test server, if test server actually makes sense, it's great. But if we need to add some weird, strange things that we cannot like find a good name, so funny example or something, but we still need to put it to test it. Yeah, like, so I would separate. But as I said before, it's like for test schema, we need to add stuff only if we need to test it, because like we put additional pressure on people implementing example servers, and we put additional pressure on libraries. So if we put subscription and somebody doesn't implement subscription, or like if we put like, yeah, so I would keep test schema minimal, but we can, as a separate issue, we can think about example schema, which illustrate all the feature, which is like separate task. And for popular example servers, I can create like GraphQL.js one, and like be and monitor what other people like. If I can review this language with implementation, yeah, I will try.
So the only thing, Jaden, did you have any questions more about this, or can I put you and highlight this?
Should we think about the dependency waterfall for all these tasks? Which ones need to happen in order and in parallel?
I think it's more or less independent. So example server is totally independent.
Yeah.
For technical framework, you need to run a couple of tests. If somebody write like full list of tests, it's also a separate task. So
I feel like this test cases, yeah. So that maybe this, I think the schema should come under the test cases. Like, there's no point in making a schema if it doesn't serve a purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the only thing that connected. You're right.
So let me see if I can. Did I move this? I think I'm moving that here. Is that what you're thinking?
Yep. Yep, and the rest can all be in parallel, I guess. Well, with the exception that the bottom one's dependent on everything above being achieved.
This one?
Yeah, yeah.
These ones could kind of be progressed, don't you think, in parallel? Just kind of get an example server committed and running.
And another small issue, like there is a help wanted issue about converting spec to specmd. And I think the earlier we start, the easier it will be to do.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear you well, Ivan.
We have like this tool that we use for main GraphQL spec called specmd.
Oh, okay.
Issue about that, and at the moment it's pretty small document, so it's pretty easy to do. But when we add more content, it will be harder and harder. So I suggest to do it right now. Yeah, I think like it can be done in like a couple hours.
All right. There's at least two things here that are open, but like anything, like if people don't have time, that's cool too. Let's make sure those ones are open. People are interested.
What's the easiest or appropriate channel, I guess, for fluid chat or communication to collaborate on some of these tasks, like I don't know, Slack channel or something?
Are you part of the GraphQL Slack workspace? Because we could create one there for GraphQL over HTTP.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I'm creating it right now.
I'm just learning of its existence.
I can send a link for you to get invited. It's under GraphQL.org. There is a community section, and give me a second. I will send to everybody in the chat link to.
Does the chat text get recorded as well?
No.
In Zoom? No. Okay.
I think so. I think it goes.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so I sent the link, and in general, there is like finally GraphQL.org started to get updated. So there is a community page, and it's have like some resources useful one. There is official Facebook group and official Slack.
Just registering now.
So I created a channel in there. I invited you, Ivan, but others can join it. It's just open public channel.
I think we can have a link in README, like, Slack page or something, or just link.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Link to the GraphQL channel. Cool.
I think like we have pretty big agenda, and we agreed on the next step. So anything else to discuss before like closing?
I think that's good for now. Oh, we need to decide when we meet next. And
Yeah. So idea was to, last time we discussed to meeting last Tuesday of a month, because like Thursday is like overbooked and intersect with governing board. So yeah. Everybody okay with this time?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I can't make that date, but don't worry too much.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I'm still messing around with Slack stuff. What time? Where's the time?
The last Tuesday of every month from 11 to 1 Pacific.
UTC time. Is that the same as what today's time was?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Okay. Cool. Well, thank you, everyone. It's a good chat. And we will see you January 28th. Is that right?
yeah, I think so.
We'll see you on the last Tuesday of January.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks,
And yeah, happy New Year.
Thanks, everyone.
Was-
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays.
Thanks.
Okay.